So Lisa Schmidt is here to introduce our speaker for the day. So thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. The Nature Conservancy's mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. To accomplish this bold mission, the Nature Conservancy recognizes and intentionally includes people who have historically been left out, ignored, and openly discriminated against. The Nature Conservancy knows that there are incredible inequities both across the globe and right here at home in access to the benefits that nature provides. When our natural world is out of balance, it is communities of color, low-income neighborhoods, and Indigenous people that disproportionately suffer. The Nature Conservancy believes that the work of protecting nature must be inclusive and beneficial to all. They are committed to promoting and championing diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in their workforce and the communities they serve. Ann MULHOLLAND is the chapter director of Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. She leads a team of scientists, fundraisers, conservation practitioners, and policy experts who are tackling some of the greatest challenges facing people and nature. MULHOLLAND rejoined the Nature Conservancy in 2020 after serving as the chapter's board chair, executive vice president of the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation, deputy mayor for the city of St. Paul, and marketing director for the Nature Conservancy's Central Division. Ann brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the Nature Conservancy in public policy, community engagement, and strategic communications. Her goals for Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota include protecting water resources, unlocking our state's climate mitigation potential, and advancing the chapter's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. She serves on several community boards and initiatives, including the Minnesota Wild Foundation and the Itasca Project Working Team. She enjoys birding, spending time with her 4 daughters, and of course, enjoying nature with her dog, Hetty. Please welcome Ann MULHOLLAND.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Can you all hear me? Super. I'm going to share my screen and walk through a presentation and make sure there's plenty of time for questions and answers. So let me share my screen. And you should see my presentation from the beginning right now. Someone let me know if that's not the case. So I'll dive right in. I wish I could be with you in person, but what I'll say is that I'm getting my second vaccine on Monday, so I'm excited about all of that freedom that will come with it. And I want to say hello to Mayor Hovland. He and I have worked together in the past, so it's great to see you this morning. I wish it was in person. As Lisa mentioned, the Nature Conservancy is a global organization, and our mission is to preserve and protect the lands and water on which all life depends. We were founded in 1951. We work in 72 countries around the globe and have protected more than 100 million acres of natural areas around the world. Our first acquisition was a 60-acre purchase along the Mianus River Gorge in New York. It's on the New York-Connecticut border. We employ hundreds of ecologists, hydrologists, biologists, economists, and other social scientists. The contributions of our trustees and our members and supporters around the world are critically important to our mission. And then right here at home, our chapter and our work are aligned fully with the global organization. So we're one global 501c3 with chapters around the globe. And in the United States, we work in every country. Our chapter is unique in that we are a 3-state chapter. So we're one of the largest chapters in the Nature Conservancy. We have 100 staff, 25 trustees, 30,000 members across the 3 states. and we've helped to protect more than 900,000 acres since 1958. This is a map that kind of just gives you a sense of our work over the years. So here in Minnesota, we've helped to protect more than 900,000 acres, but we currently own about 60,000 acres. And to give you kind of a context, 900,000 acres is over twice the amount of land in the Minnesota State Park System. So that gives you kind of a good sense of the breadth of our protection work. In North Dakota, we have under management about 51,000 acres. And in South Dakota, we have under management about 13,000 acres. But today, what I really want to talk about is kind of the crises that we are addressing at the Nature Conservancy. And they're really in two areas. So first, we are in an abundance crisis. So what does that mean? So there was a global study done very recently in the last couple of years that shows that the biodiversity and ecosystem services, so the biodiversity on Earth was down 20% overall. And there was another study done that many of you may have seen by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which I don't know if any of you are birders, but that bird species are down by 29%. So we are in the midst of an abundance crisis. But we believe we can reverse these trends if we're willing to conserve adequate amounts of high quality habitat. So this kind of gives you a sense of some of the habitat that is being lost, or the species that are being lost. So there are things that are doing really well. Coyotes, I'm sure many of you see them in Edina and around neighborhoods, raccoons, fox. But then there are extraordinary species and some of our, what we would consider our hallmark species that are down, like the gray wolf, or in South Dakota, the black-footed ferret. And the majority of these species, their habitat is being lost and their abundance is down exponentially, as you can see, some on the brink of extinction. The other thing that's happening that you all hear a lot about is that nature is moving. And so what do we mean by that? So what we mean is that nature is moving upslope and it's moving north, which means that climate is shifting and species are shifting in terms of finding adequate and appropriate habitat for themselves. So that fact that nature is moving, that's not totally abnormal. So movement has occurred from 200, it takes 200 to 400 years, or about 500 on average, for nature to move, but it is happening at a rapid pace now, the movement of nature. So part of our challenge is to make sure that we are understanding that nature is moving, understanding the abundance issues so that we can address those challenges. So the Nature Conservancy is a science-based organization, and we base all of our work on understanding science and trends and how best to protect nature for all people. So this is a really complicated map that says a couple of different things. We released this map of the United States last fall, and it articulates several things that are really important. This map shows where there are examples of resilience, so where nature can be resilient, and that's really important. It also shows where there is an occurrence of habitats and rare species and unique communities that we need to protect. And then finally, it shows climate flow. So how climate is moving, as I just talked about, and how that flow is working. So this gives us a great roadmap to areas that we need to protect. And as some of you may know, you may have heard this kind of thing called 30 by 30. So the Convention on Biological Diversity, about a year or so, it's probably about 2 years ago now, came out with a goal of protecting 30% of all lands and waters, of all habitat types by 2030, in order for us to reverse those trends around abundance that I spoke about earlier. That goal, 30 by 30, and the goals set forth by the Paris Climate Agreement are the two overarching global goals, and they are both global goals that are guiding all of our work at the Nature Conservancy globally and at the Nature Conservancy here at home in Minnesota, North and South Dakota. So that map kind of expressed here in Minnesota, North and South Dakota, this is our kind of roadmap for our chapter. We spend a lot of time with our scientists, and I'm not asking you to dive deep into this map because it's filled with a lot of granular detail, but it helps guide our work on where we need to be working in our 3 states. So let me tell you a little bit about the Nature Conservancy and our priorities here. And maybe we can think a little bit about ways that we might, our goals may overlap. So we have 3 core chapter priorities, which are fully aligned with our 3 core global priorities. And those are to protect land and water, to tackle climate change, and to provide food and water sustainably. And I want to talk about each of those a little bit. And protecting land and water really is our signature strategy. It's what those people who know about the Nature Conservancy know us for, and that is protecting resilient lands and waters across Minnesota, North and South Dakota. That doesn't always mean that it's public land or land that we keep in ownership, but land that we help protect through a variety of strategies. And that is also working with private landowners. And I want to take a minute and share a video with all of you, because I think this video will help express the core and the heart and soul of our protect land and water strategies. So I'm going to pull that up right now. And it's right here, so I just have to figure out. Okay. Optimize.
My name is Mike Freed. I grew up on wild lakes in Minnesota. The Boundary Waters Canoe Wilderness Area was a place that became the center of the earth for me. It was a place I gravitated back to where I could get in touch with wild nature. I taught forestry in 5 or 6 universities around the country. As the head of a park management curriculum, you're really busy, so you tend to get too immersed in your work. I started hiking. It became a pattern. 9 months working at the university, and then 3 months to 4 months living in a tent. And that pattern kind of took me away from the things I loved so much. The Boundary Waters and Minnesota lakes, lakes of the north. Now I've come back full circle to some land I bought years and years ago that was right near the Boundary Waters and had these 6 wild lakes. They're natural lakes. This area is very important to the psyche and the emotional needs of a lot of people in Minnesota. That's why I bought these pieces of property on these wild lakes, because I wanted to be able to touch bases with that. What happens if you just sell this land? It's going to be fragmented. Somebody's going to build a cabin and punch a road in. Someone's going to subdivide it into little 10-acre and 5-acre and 1-acre pieces. It was an alternative that I had, and I could have made money that way. That's land fragmentation. That destroys the complexity of the habitat. That's what I wanted to avoid. I've been privileged to take care of this land, and I want to pass it on to someone who can continue to care for it. That's up to the Nature Conservancy. That's where I turn to find a home for these properties.
Mike's property is scattered across 12 parcels in a large, probably 30,000 acre landscape of Superior National Forest. It's the only private land within that landscape. If it got split up into many parcels, and we start punching holes into this intact forest, you create barriers for movement, and through climate change, species need to be able to move. These large blocks of forest give species that kind of opportunity. The other thing is that the forest that's here continues to suck carbon out of the atmosphere, so both the storage and the continued sequestration are really important for mitigating climate change.
When I was hiking the Appalachian Trail, I came to the end of the trail after 2,200 miles of walking. My last hike up Mount Katahdin, we head up the mountain, and just at daybreak, you come to a plaque at the bottom of the mountain, and it says, "Man is born to die. Our works are short-lived. Buildings crumble, monuments decay, and wealth vanishes. But Katahdin, in all its glory, will remain the mountain of the people of Maine." Percival Baxter, the governor of Maine. He was having a hard time getting the legislature to purchase Mount Katahdin before the forestry companies got there. They were logging up to the base. And so he bought 6,000 acres and gave it to the people of Maine. These places are rapidly disappearing. I believe that we have to do what Percival Baxter did. My gift to the people of Minnesota is 2,000 acres of wild land that will remain in some kind of conservation ownership. This is the gift that the people of Minnesota deserve.
So I share that as a great expression of our work, and to kind of, it makes this presentation kind of, I think, make a lot more sense. So our work, protecting land and water, which was our first strategy that I expressed to you. And we're doing really three major things within that strategy. And I'm sorry, I think I'll go back one slide. I went ahead. So we do four major things within protecting land and water: conserving resilient lands and waters, managing for resilience, which I'll explain, living with fire, and working with indigenous lands and communities. So we do direct protection, and that's what you saw in the Mike Freed video. But we also build the capacity of others using all that science that I shared, and are trying to look at ways to expand conservation finance, not only in the public sector, but with private dollars as well. Another thing that we're really doing is really managing for resilience, climate resilience specifically. So our grasslands in the western parts of the states, and our forestry in Northeast, North Central, and really down through Central and even in Southern Minnesota, they're changing, and the species are changing. For those of you who drive the North Shore on Lake Superior, you'll see the changing and shifting of the species that are growing. We also believe in using fire. We've used fire for years in our prairies, and they're critically important to rejuvenating prairie. This is controlled fire. And we need to really reintroduce fire to our forested landscapes. And that's something that we're working on pretty seriously. Fire actually helps prevent fire, which I know some find interesting, but it's also an important part ecologically of helping the health of a forest. And then working with indigenous lands and communities. We have 23 tribal nations in our 3 states and that have a lot of land in their ownership, which is wonderful because tribal communities are the original caretakers of our lands and waters. And we have a lot to learn from them and with them. So we're on a cultural learning journey. We have many projects that we're doing in and with indigenous partners. One that I find really exciting is we are one of the largest bison producers in the country. We have 2 bison ranches in our chapter, one in North Dakota, one in South Dakota, and we're beginning the process of returning bison to indigenous lands. Bison are a critical part of caring for prairies. They play a really important role. Our second strategy, our big area of focus, is climate change. You all have heard a lot about climate change, I'm sure. It's critically important. It is here and it is having an impact on our way of life. I like to start by saying that it has warmed in Minnesota and in North and South Dakota significantly already. And the Paris Climate Agreement sets forth a set of goals for all of us to follow. And there's work to do here locally and work to do globally on climate change. But the impacts of climate change have already happened in areas that are drought stricken in the western part of our chapter, areas where there is immense flooding and a lot of water in other parts of our chapter, species that have changed and moved, which we can see both in terms of animals and plant life. So climate change is here and we must do something to act, and we're on a time frame. But there's really good news about climate change. We've heard a lot about the need to transition our energy sector, but you probably haven't heard a lot about the role that actually nature can play in climate mitigation. And there's a lot that nature can do. And that's what we're focused on at the Nature Conservancy. How nature can help in areas like our plant life, like forests and grasslands, though that plant life really can capture carbon and play an important part and has many multiple benefits. And those multiple benefits are everything from clean water to economic to protecting our wildlife. So using nature to tackle climate change is really important and helps our way of life. And in our 3-state chapter, this is just a little way of showing internally what we have to contribute, what our natural infrastructure has to contribute to climate change, and it's meaningful. So we're very focused on that in our 3-state chapter. So what are natural climate solutions look like? Well, in the agriculture world, it looks like cover crops, improved nitrogen management, reduced tillage. So work with farmers. But forestry is one of the biggest plays we can have. Reforestation, so actually planting trees where there used to be forest. Improved forest management, riparian buffers, all those kinds of things. Avoided forest conversion, which is very important. All of those things have a huge benefit as well to climate change. So our chapter has 3 major strategies that we are deploying projects on. One is to deploy natural climate solutions, build a constituency, so build people for climate, and a diverse constituency that looks different so that people are advocating for climate. And then third, because climate change, as I mentioned, is already here and having impacts, climate adaptation. We need to be able to adapt to climate change. So on natural climate solutions, we're working with the private sector a lot to enter the carbon market because we think the private sector has a lot that it can and is doing in terms of climate change, so really helping to build that market. We're trying to really jumpstart reforestation, and we'll be announcing probably a statewide reforestation plan late this summer with partners from the public sector to the private sector and nonprofit sector. And we're really trying to develop a playbook for peatland restoration. Minnesota is in a unique position in that we have peatlands and they can play a really important role. One of the examples of reforestation is reforestation. And I mentioned that a little bit, so I'm going to skip over for time because I do want to get to questions. But we're really looking in Minnesota, we're going to be launching the Minnesota Million campaign very soon, which is to reforest 1 million acres in Minnesota. So I also mentioned people for climate. So we're trying to really build a diverse climate coalition. We have to make sure that climate change mitigation and activities include people and include benefits for people. So we want to engage folks like farmers in rural Minnesota, tribal communities across Minnesota, as well as the urban core, to really engage and activate on climate change. We're really building a climate policy agenda and working at the state legislature on that as well. And in terms of nature-based adaptation, I will share with you, that we're working really hard, specifically in the grasslands areas of the state, to make sure that our prairies adapt. Our prairies are one of the most threatened ecosystems in Minnesota and really across the globe. And interestingly, our prairie seeds we need to really adapt prairie seeds. So we're working out in the western part of the states, testing seeds from all over different landscapes to see what's going to make it in 10 years from now, so that we can protect that bird life and our clean water, and that prairies stay resilient through climate change. Another, and I mentioned this earlier, is Highway 61. For those of you who drive Highway 61, you may have noticed that there's a giant die-off of our birch trees. They're not coming back. Those birch trees are there for a series of reasons. It was logging many years ago, and that was the species that came up and thrived. But they are all dying by it's their natural life cycle, and they're dying off, and they're not going to come back because of all sorts of threats created by climate change. So we are very focused on replanting, so restoring the forestry on the North Shore with species that are going to survive for the next several decades. The other and our final strategy that we're really focused on, and then I really want to open it up to all of you and take some questions, is to provide food and water sustainably. In Minnesota and in North and South Dakota, our agriculture work is vital. We are feeding a growing world, and we need to do that sustainably. So our theory of change really is in 3 ways. One, we want to work with those folks that are advising farmers at scale. So farmer advisors, those are people at the co-ops, but people that farmers are going to for materials, for seed and guidance. We also really want to work with the supply chain, because we know that providing food and water sustainably is going to require those purchasing those goods are doing that with our ecosystems and the environment in mind. And third, we're trying to demonstrate in several areas across Minnesota, North and South Dakota, these new practices that actually can be successful, both economically successful, because that's vital for the producer, and environmentally successful. So our work with farmer advisors really is about rolling out training around things like cover crops and no-till farming practices. It's about rolling out this 4R certification, which is the right place, the right amount of fertilizer. It's nutrient management and making sure we're getting nutrient management right. This work is going really well, and we're really convinced that this farmer advisor strategy is going to be really impactful. The other is really to focus on our supply chain. We work closely with General Mills and Cargill and a lot of corporations that are purchasing food, and we're working together to help incentivize and to create incentives for farmers to use these practices that protect the soil, therefore they capture and hold carbon and provide clean water much more in a much greater way. So the supply chain is really important, and we've been lucky to have really phenomenal partners here in Minnesota particularly. And then we have several demonstration sites that we're trying to bring to scale. And these demonstration sites are really important. I was able to go to one this past summer and really see the impacts of some of our soil health practice work taking place on the ground, where we've planted cover crops, and those are crops that you plant after you harvest the crops in the grounds to make sure the soil stays covered year round. There are other places in the States where folks are piloting annual crops, so new crops that actually grow year round and keep roots in the soil year round. And that's really important. And there are other areas where we're piloting no-till agriculture. So you're not tilling up that soil. We always think when we see that going by a farm, oh, that's all must be really healthy. Well, it's actually not. It releases tons of carbon when you use tilling as a strategy. And there's a lot of evidence that no-till agriculture actually reaps really positive benefits and both economically for the producer and for the soil. So we're very focused on these soil health practices and pilot projects. We have several throughout the states. We have a very large one in Stearns County, so not too far from the Twin Cities, that we really focus on. So I wanted to speed walk through. So those are kind of our three core strategies, and they all really overlap with one another. So you heard the story from Michael Fried. That is 2,500 acres of land that we are protecting. We may not hold on to all of it because there's a lot of ways to protect land. It doesn't all need to be in public ownership or in a fence around it. They can be working lands. So we spend a lot of time on our protecting land and water. You heard about our tackling climate change, and so much of that work overlaps with protecting land and water and providing food and water sustainably. And then we're very focused on agriculture and how to provide that food and water sustainably. So that's the formal part of my presentation. And I wanted to kind of come off presentation mode and take questions from you all about our work. Some of you may know it well. Some of you might be new to the Nature Conservancy, but I'd love to hear from you in terms of what you're thinking about. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say Happy Earth Day to all of you on Thursday. And I loved that this presentation got to be this week. So with that, Lisa or others, I'll take any questions that you all have for me. And my dog has joined me, so you might hear some heavy panting.
So I'm wondering, when I travel your region, I see a lot of windmills.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how you feel about that in terms of Nature Conservatory.
That is a brilliant question, actually. So we know a couple of things from a climate change perspective. Energy policy is game number one. That has the ability to have about achieve about 2/3 of our goals from a carbon sequestration perspective, and is to change our energy policy. So wind and solar matter a lot. And we are supportive. And we have some problems with siting. And that's something that the Nature Conservancy has engaged in. And actually, you can go to our website and search Site Wind Right. We have mapping and science that shows where are the best places to site wind, particularly in the Great Plains where there's the greatest capacity for development. So where are the best places that won't have negative impacts on birds, on resilient networks? And we're working closely with the wind industry. We're working closely with communities to try to create incentives for siting that wind right. But I would be remiss if I didn't say there are examples of really poor siting out there. And that's problematic. And we are working very hard at making sure wind is sited right. But yet wind is very important. Solar is very important. We're not going to achieve our Paris climate goals, and we need to do it right.
I have a question, Anne. This is Lisa Schmidt.
Hi, Lisa.
What tree species are you choosing to plant along Highway 61 up north?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not going to have the perfect answer for you. But a white pine is really important. And that's one of the species. There are many others that I can't articulate. I need my scientists with me to tell me. But I do want to say a couple of the threats to the planting on the North Shore that's really unique. The number one threat is deer. So deer are an edge species, and deer are a problem. We have an abundance of deer. And the North Shore didn't normally have that abundance of deer. So they are browsing, and to get a forest to grow is nearly impossible. You should see the infrastructure that we need to put in place in order to make sure that we can plant trees up there. So it costs a little bit, and it's more challenging to regrow and restore that forested landscape because of deer. So I know white pine is one. I wish I had the other species, but there's a huge effort up there, and there's a whole coalition built along the North Shore to really reforest that whole area.
And this is Mary Brindle in at the country club. And so Rotary has areas of focus, which define the areas of service throughout the world that Rotary focuses on. The seventh area of focus is environmental. I'm wondering if the Nature Conservancy is providing guidance to Rotary or local Rotary clubs on how they can get involved in conservation efforts in their own communities.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if there's an explicit Rotary nationwide partnership. That might be a good one to explore. What I do know is that we have a website globally and one here locally in the chapter to really engage folks in our strategies to speak up for nature. And I'd be thrilled to pass that along to you. As we launch our reforestation plan, I think it's going to get closer and closer to the metro area, some of the areas that we need to do reforestation, and that might be another great opportunity. And then finally, I just wanted to thank you because you mentioned at the beginning of this meeting that you were in the process of planting trees. Every tree really actually does matter. Our job is to focus science on where those trees have the greatest chance to be successful and have the greatest impact for climate and for nature.
Wonderful. And thank you so much.